So it took me 20 years as a psychotherapist to realize that my greatest gift was also my biggest trap, especially outside of the therapy room. I've worked with thousands of people, high achievers, athletes, educators, stay-at-home parents, CEOs, and I started to pick up on a pattern. These people weren't primarily addicted to your stereotypical vices: alcohol, caffeine, work, sex. No. Their primary addiction was fixing people, fixing situations, fixing emotions. Because if they didn't have to feel it, then maybe. If they could fix it, then they wouldn't have to feel it. It was really hard for them to be in the presence of someone struggling. They were so quick to jump into action, give advice, offer solutions, find a quick fix, make it better. And from the outside, this does look like pure kindness. But underneath, it's interwoven with this quiet need for control, for predictability, for defined connection. Because again, if they could fix it, they wouldn't have to feel it. Now, empathy and compassion are two of the world's greatest gifts, and we need those two things now more than ever. But you know what I found is that the people that have the highest level of empathy and compassion tend to be the worst at setting and maintaining healthy boundaries. They are so good at telling and reminding everyone to take care of yourselves. Make sure that you say no. Make sure that you prioritize your self-care. But when it comes to them and themselves, they fall short. Guilt may be a deterrent. Looking inward might be too overwhelming. So they look out here and find their structure and sense of purpose with other people's struggles. When it's time to look inward, that's foreign. They don't have practice with that. Sometimes compassion is just our discomfort in disguise. So the sigh, the distress, that's what did it for me. And not as a clinician. As a clinician, I have boundaries, I have frameworks. But as a mother, as a wife, that sigh around my household, those disappointed, stressful looks, that derailed me. I found as a mother, as a wife, as a parent, as a friend, being 2 steps ahead meant that I was fixing and solving, meant that I was loving. I could feel compassion fatigue creep in slowly as I made space for everyone else except for myself emotionally. And this was confusing to me because I had a habit and consistency when it came to my physical health. But emotionally, I was always out here trying to fill the needs of everyone else without putting myself into the equation. Again, I thought fixing was love. I was on a rampage of serial fixing. And so serial fixing, I started using this term, and a serial fixer, if you think about the word serial, it's something that we've identified a pattern with, right? And so when we're serial fixing, we are constantly putting ourselves in the role of the fixer and the solver, and oftentimes prematurely. And so there's a lot of emotional empathy, there's a lot of emotional intelligence, but serial fixers tend to jump in too quick. They tend to create safe places for people, encourage vulnerability. They tend to not be great at that, though, themselves, right? Their emotional intelligence tend to be high, but if they can take care of everything out here, if everyone else is okay and they have a hand in that, then they're okay. A serial fixer's motto might be, I'll endure, I'll accommodate, as long as they're okay, I'm okay. Now, this is not something that just happens. Serial fixing generally comes about from when we're at a young age, depending on how we were raised, the nature and environment of our families. We learned and made strong, rigid associations that fixing meant love, that being 2 steps ahead and suppressing what we feel maybe meant control, maybe meant calm. When we could help, when we could step in, that was the source that fueled our self-worth. And so you can see that this not only sometimes is a trauma response, but we feed into the notion with these very rigid associations that leave us in these patterns feeling trapped, feeling exhausted, feeling and fueling imbalances in our relationships that can tend to be incredibly confusing. I'm working so hard to build connection and vulnerability. And why is this not happening? And so oftentimes we take the bait in conversations with our children, with our friends, with our partners. We hear a simple yes, no question that might be interwoven with some distress or uncomfortable emotions. And we start to fill in the gaps. We begin to fix, find that solution, and not only to soothe their discomfort, but ours. Sometimes the more we fix, it's not necessarily to soothe what's out here, but also prevent the turmoil in here. So let's take parenting, for example. Parenting is something when our child comes home and they may share about their day and how stressed they are and this and that, and a serial fixer jumps immediately into action. Well, I'll call the teacher again. Let me make a note of this. I'll call the mom. Don't worry about it. What do you really have to worry about at this age? Because if the child can recover quickly, then the parent is soothed, and that association with being a good parent gets checked off. Sometimes this rigidity and these associations leave us in an all or nothing thinking pattern, black or white. We get very uncomfortable with the gray, very uncomfortable with seeing someone else in distress and something unresolved, because not only do we have to witness this, but we have to, in tandem, deal with the discomfort within us. This happens in the workplace as well. Teams are stressed, teams are struggling, and as a leader, you might see this and immediately begin to internalize. If there are people on my team who are perpetually stressed, don't have the practice or the know-how to ask directly, we internalize, well, I must not be a good leader then. I must not be a good parent then. If we're at home and we hear our partner, sighing, we hear the silences creeping in, we immediately internalize and think, well, I must be failing at this whole marriage thing. The more that we fix, the more that we're managing. And what's the important part about this is that when we begin to take a step back, when we begin to find the gray, when we begin to validate instead of jump 3 steps ahead in offering solutions, offering advice, prematurely relating, when we sit in the uncomfortable, we're leading with empathy, but also empowering. When we learn to validate by a pause, a simple head nod, eye contact, and paraphrasing or validating, it sounds like this has been a really rough week for you. We are in collaboration with someone. We are also sharing the message with them that you are feeling something really hard, but I have faith that you will be able to recover from it. When we jump in too quickly, especially as parents, we're communicating to our child who might be feeling disappointment that you can't handle that. Your feelings are too big, so I will manage them. This takes away the opportunity for empowerment, to get practice, to build intrinsic self-trust. The more repetitions we get, just like as an athlete, just with your physical health, you have to stay consistent and get your repetitions in. The same goes for our mental and emotional health. And when we jump in and fix and solve and take false ownership, we're creating these micro codependencies. And so let's take a step back. These parts of us that get in the way, that immediately are operating with urgency, that quickly say, fix, solve, soothe, because if you don't, you might not be a good parent. You might not be a good leader. You might not be a good partner. These parts of us are protective in nature, and they need soothed. They need to understand with practice, with you changing things up, with you allowing people to keep their own ownership as you come in and support. This is a way that you are empowering others at age 5 or 55 to build that intrinsic trust, to get their own repetitions in, to soothe those protective parts within them. So picture a ball of yarn. Picture a tangled ball of yarn. And every time someone had a problem, their tangled ball of yarn, you either grabbed it and tried to untangle it for them, or they threw it right to you and you caught them willingly. Now, 1, 2, 3 balls of yarn aren't heavy, but a whole big group of tangled balls of yarn, that's a lot. Think about what it would look like if you allowed everyone to hang tight of their ball of yarn while you still led with empathy and compassion and pulled at a few threads here and there, but communicated, interwoven in their distress, that you trust that they're going to be able to handle and recover. Support, don't solve. That's when we get our fix. That's when we empower and we lead with compassion at the same time. Support, don't solve.
Just think about anything in front of you that might be a potential distraction. Okay? I want you to clear your clutter externally. We're very out of shape when it comes to presence in a lot of ways, right? We're constantly distracted during the day, whether we invite it or not or create it or not, we just are. We're interrupted a lot. Our brains, unfortunately, are highly conditioned that we are productive when we are frantic and stressed and have a lot of things going. Okay? So I'd invite you, I know you're not going to hang on to every word that I say, but I would love for you to think about this next hour or so as an opportunity for you to get some reps in with just being here and getting better in shape with just being here, okay? And so a lot of you have probably been bombarded with several thoughts. Oh my God, my email's piling up. Did so-and-so get his lunch this morning? Did I do this? What's on my grocery list? All the things, right? Not only are you just professionals, you're a lot of other things too. And so your minds are constantly going. I'm sure you have 15 checklists, as do I, in your mind. But what I would love for you to do, I know everyone has a piece of paper. If you are bombarded with a constant thought or a to-do that might take you away from being here and the work that hopefully you're going to do for you, which is sometimes few and far between, I'd love for you to write just a little keyword or a symbol or something at the top of your paper that acknowledges this thought, this care, concern, worry, but you're also setting a boundary with yourself that right now's not the time, okay? I have to do this sometimes in therapy sessions. I'm working with a client and they'll bring something up and my mind immediately will go to, oh my God, that happened to me in 8th grade too, and I'll start maybe going down a path and I say, no, Leah, you're in session right now. You're not going to flip the script and tell your client about what happened to you in 8th grade, right? That'd be highly inappropriate. And so a lot of times though, I'll have to write at the top of my case note, 8th grade, so that I know I'm validating that. I'm not trying to shove it down. I'm validating, but I'm also setting a boundary that now is not the time, but I need to trust myself that I'm going to go back and revisit it, right? And I think it's that revisiting part sometimes that we forget to do. And we shove down, and some of us get very good, or so we think, at suppressing certain thoughts, suppressing certain feelings, because it might not be an appropriate time to engage with them. But what we do is we create a lot of these suppression bubbles, and we carry them around. It's like walking around with a full balloon. And that last little puff of air can come out in very different ways, right? So if you think about carrying around suppression bubbles and giving yourself these opportunity to circle back to yourself, as you probably do the people that you love most in your lives, it's essential for acting and living proactively versus reactively and walking around with that full balloon. Okay? How are we doing? Good? Makes sense? All right, cool. All right, so how many of you have had a hangover in this room? Okay. These are not Jell-O shots, by the way, so we're not going there. Okay, so yes, hangovers. We typically, correlate them, associate them with drinking a little too much alcohol, yeah? Or other substances. But if we think about anxiety hangovers, we think about emotional hangovers, they are a thing. I have several clients that I've worked with, hell, even friends that I have, that say, my in-laws were in town, or I had a really big project, or something that was an identifiable stressor. And I mustered up my grit, my resilience, and I pushed through, and I was on my best behavior, and I did everything I needed to do, and then my in-laws left, or that project ended, and I felt like crap. It's like I felt more anxious when it was over, or I couldn't really get back. And then of course our critic comes out and we're like, what's wrong with me, right? And a lot of times, again, that's a perfect example of sometimes of these suppression bubbles that, such as life, we can't engage, and we're not supposed to engage with every single thought or emotion. That's exhausting. And some of you might be sitting here thinking, well, I do that. And that's okay. We're going to talk about it. But again, that right there, when we have an outlet, when we do begin to relax, sometimes that's when our minds and bodies clear the clutter. Yeah? When I was in college decades ago, and my season for basketball was over, and I would come home, and I can remember coming home, for that weekend, thinking, it was a wonderful season, I'm exhausted, but it's done, and a lot of stress associated with that. I could just feel myself kind of melting, like, And I get home, and I remember driving home, had all my laundry and all my stuff, and I was ready, and I was anticipating what my mom would maybe make for dinner. And I remember she said, well, I hope you don't get sick this time. And I was like, sick? Because I didn't really get sick. I was like, what do you mean sick? She's like, well, you always get like a bad cold, or you just, you really run down. I hope that doesn't happen this time. And I was like, does that really happen every time? She's like, oh, yeah. And I thought about it, and I was like, gosh, she's right. Because for that 6 months or whatever it was, going nonstop with sports and school and social and parties and all the things, my body, I think, knew, like, we're kind of in somewhat of a little bit of a survival mode, right? Like, we're going nonstop, and we don't have time to be sick. With all these demands and things that we have, we don't have time. And so when I finally began to, I did that, it's good, it's over, here's a transition, my body was like, well, this is a great opportunity to clear the clutter, right? Yeah. Think about vacations. Think about, you're like, okay, I got all my to-do list done, I got this, I passed my work over to my colleague, I'm good, we're flying tomorrow, and you get to your vacation and you're kind of a wreck. You can't very well transition into that mindset of like, I get to lay on the beach, or I get to do this in the mountains, or I get to do this, or I'm at my own, whatever it is, it's sometimes really hard to transition. And when we start to relax, again, if we're not proactively clearing our clutter and letting air out, our bodies and minds access that. Sometimes at 2 a.m. If you're one of those people thinking, at 2 a.m., yeah, it accesses it all right, right? So these are good indicators. Even though sometimes we think our bodies and minds are sabotaging us, they're actually on our team. They're giving us signals that something ain't working. Yeah? Okay. I would love for you all, right out of the gate, I want you to get with your table, and I would love for you, I'm going to ask you to be a little bit vulnerable, just share how you know, and I'm going to tell you in a minute the distinctions kind of between stress, anxiety, burnout briefly, but how do you know, what do you feel physically, what do you feel mentally, emotionally, that lets you know, I'm really stressed? So I'd love for you to talk about that. I'm sure you'll find some commonalities, but go ahead and take a minute or two and just let's talk about that. Go ahead.
It's like, great, shut up. I thought I cleared it. I want to double check everything.
All good?
Yes. These kids so nervous.
Yeah, it's okay. Perfect. Yeah, great. right, let's take another minute or so, and then we'll bring it back to the group. All right, let's start winding down. Finish your thought. I love what I'm hearing from afar. All right. Okay. Thank you. I heard a lot of good stuff, and I'd love to ask, just from, so we can bring this back to the group a little bit. If someone would like to share, what are some things that you feel, let's start with physically. What are some things that you feel physically that okay, my body's trying to let me know something's happening or something's brewing? Anybody? Yes.
People at our table get laryngitis.
Oh, yes. That's a really severe signal. I'm sorry. Yes. Okay.
I have a real pain in my chest.
Yes.
I feel like I'm going to have a heart attack.
Oh, yes, and that tightening. Yes, tightening. You can feel it here, hips, right? There's a lot of different places we can feel that tightening. Yes. Anybody else? Yes.
A few of us do hyperfocus.
Hyperfocus. Yes. Do you know, it's so interesting during the pandemic especially. I had a lot of people come in 40s, 50s and say, that's it, I think I now have ADHD, or I think I now have ADD. And I was like, okay, what's happening? What makes, and it was this hyper focus, and then also I think the decision fatigue and the chaos and all the different, reorganization of like, where do I connect? Where do I get back? I think we're on overdrive all the time. And for me, when I know I'm getting stressed, my patience and my attention are like the first two things to go, which I hate to admit, because I feel like I'm pretty patient overall. I hope I am as a clinician. But, that's two things that are out the window. Yeah, so that was a big thing that I noticed, especially during the pandemic. Anybody else? And we can move into emotionally or mentally what you feel, what you notice. Anybody else? Yes.
I feel like my body just ripples from the inside out.
Yes.
I feel like I can just feel it rippling.
Right.
I'll wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
Feel like
That feeling of always being on, too, is a big one, right? Just kind of, you're always frantic a little bit. Yes, you're not alone. Anybody else? Yes.
So for us, it's probably similar to that. Several of us talked about a kind of an internal buildup,
Yes.
that it's waiting, it's building.
Yeah.
There's this nice blue.
Right. And if you do, if it's helpful, to kind of think about that balloon in our belly, right? And I think on any given day, there are going to be things that puff up our balloon a bit. That's life, right? I mean, maybe you were a little late running in today, a little air came out, maybe you didn't have what you wanted for breakfast, a little air, but then you met it and someone smiled real nice at you and said they liked your shirt, and air came out a little bit. So throughout the day, we're kind of fluctuating. But if we think about, if we feel like we're constantly walking around with that full balloon, and we don't even, sometimes we may schedule or we may organize things for recovery, but we don't allow ourselves to fully engage in them, and we're going to talk about guilt a little bit later. But sometimes, again, that full balloon is, as well as I do, you could be on the highway, somebody pulls out in front of you, one week you might be like, God, yeah. And the next week you might want to just be like, get out of your car, so it just depends sometimes on how big your balloon is, right? So thinking about that and how am I letting air out of my balloon? Just you being present right now or attempting to be present, you're letting some air out. Right? And I really do invite you, when you're bombarded with I got to do this, just make a little note and set those boundaries with yourself in real time. Okay? You got to get those reps in. That's the self-trust. Okay. So I want to talk, we talked a little bit, I'm not going to go too deep into this. I know a lot of you know this, but stress and anxiety share similar symptoms. Okay? They do. But stress is something that has an external trigger, an external, something that happened. I have a big project, I have a really difficult conversation, my in-laws in town, I did this, I'm running late, I'm in traffic. All these things that typically once they're gone, once they've ended, we have a very good opportunity to rebalance, recalibrate. If we're in the state of perpetual stress, perpetual triggers, and sometimes how we view these things, the narratives we create, it can lead to these internal, right? This internal chaos. Anxiety is internal, stress external. Okay? Anxiety is also something that moves us away from the present. We are engulfed by futuristic thinking, typically with a negative tint, unfortunately. We're going through all these far-fetched scenarios where, we end up potentially dead or losing our jobs or all the things. Or these rehashing the past. Rehashing 8th grade, rehashing a week ago, rehashing a conversation that we had 2 weeks ago that has kept us up at night. And when we maybe revisit this with a friend and say, remember 2 weeks ago when I said this and I'm really sorry? And 9 out of 10 times, I know y'all have been there, they say, I don't even know what the hell you're talking about. And you're thinking, I've done so much work on this. How is this not a big deal, right? In those cases, I want you to know, and I know it's so important to remember this, that is being filtrated heavily through our egos. That doesn't mean we're egocentric, in which we all kind of are very self-centered beings, let's be real. But our ego is almost categorizing this event, this conversation, this thing we failed to do, whatever it is, as something that everyone that we know is thinking about as heavily as we are, right? And that's just not the case, I can remember in 8th grade coming home from school. My grandmother was visiting, and my mother and grandma were in their kitchen. And I can remember my grandma saying, hi, how was your day? The usual greeting. I said, fine, but there are these girls in the hallway during the passing period, and I know they were talking about me. They would whisper, and then they'd look down the hall, and then it just ruined my whole day. And I'm, of course, racking my brain all day as a 13-year-old trying to figure out what the hell I did, what I didn't do, what am I wearing, all these things. It sabotaged my whole day. And my grandma said, well, wait, were you in the conversation with them? I said, no, they were down the hall. And she goes, well, then that's none of your business. And I was like, you're old. I kind of looked at my mom, and my mom didn't meet the connection with me. I said, well, what do you mean it's none of my business? I know they were talking about me. She goes, what people say about you when you're not in part of the conversation is none of your business. And as you can see, that has stuck with me for decades. I didn't believe it for a while. I was like, but now I get it. And if you think about all the work that we do behind the scenes with, well, she probably said this, well, they probably think this, we do it a lot, right? And it is so taxing. It is so taxing. And rather than being productive and maybe checking in or taking ownership for something or whatever we feel like we must need to do that always isn't necessary, we rack our brains. That brings us into anxiety cycles. And I want you to remember, because we all get there sometimes, that's being filtrated heavily through our ego, right? And some questions, especially with anxiety and, just when you're in these cycles where it's like, what if, then self-doubt, your critics surfacing, all these things, it's awful. It's really exhausting as well. It's highly emotional. And your amygdala is firing off left and right, okay? But these questions right here, what can I control? What are my options? What's my role? What's really mine in this situation? And what can I let go of? Are amazing questions to bring logic into the mix and bring you into a part of your brain where stress has to move over, anxiety has to move over. If you think of only having so much space, and many of you might be sitting here thinking, well, anxiety has way too much real estate. And again, you're not alone. But thinking about asking these questions to bring you back to the present, right, is highly effective. Even going through what your options are, even if you're not going to do any of them, you're channeling different parts of your brain. You're moving and giving yourself the option to travel down different tunnels of thought, okay? If my girls were here, I have 14 and 12-year-old, they would probably roll their eyes and be like, oh my God, my mom says, what are your options all the time? And I do, I know I do, but it's one of those things, and we're going to go into this in a little bit, where, again, as a parent, it's so difficult sometimes to know exactly what we think our children should do. And we jump to the rescue, we try to save them from not feeling something, but in all reality, we're getting reps in. They're not, right? And they're not building self-trust. And so even asking those questions to our colleagues, to our, partners, to our friends in a way with your flavor of just well, what do you feel like? What do you feel like your next steps are? Or what are you thinking? Or what are your options? You may know very damn well what they should do, but when you give advice, people don't do it. People don't take it. They gotta own it, right? So that's a great question. These are awesome questions for yourself to kind of, again, rebalance out some of this emotion, high emotion with logic. Okay, it takes reps though, right?